Welcome to the podcast where we take a deep dive into the stories behind construction business leaders. We will share how they got started, how they found success, and the lessons learned along the way. I'm your host, Eric Fortenberry. Welcome to Builder Stories. Welcome back, everybody. I hope everyone's having a great week. We are excited to have David Hopkins with JNT Construction here today. They are actually located in our hometown, Dallas, Texas. So very excited to have a local Dallasite on the show today. But David, he is the vice president of sales with JNT. They do a lot of multifamily work as well as some commercial work. Both new builds and interior finish out, remodel type work. So really excited to have you here today, David. Welcome to Builder Stories.
Thank you very much. Thanks so much, Eric, and the whole JobTread team for having me out. It's great.
Yeah, absolutely. So why don't you tell us a little bit about, you could probably do a much better job than I do. What does JNT do? How did you guys get started?
Yeah. So JNT, my time with JNT started back about 11 years ago, 12 years ago. And we started off doing a lot of residential remodeling or additions and fix and flips and stuff like that. I think that's how a lot of contractors in our space kind of got started as well. And we learned pretty quick that you can't scale that as much as we wanted. So over time, we grew into the multifamily and commercial spaces. And now that's really where we find ourselves living, in those two niches, the multifamily and the commercial side.
Awesome. So how did you first get into construction? Like what brought you into into this business and into this industry?
Yeah, so my history really started in exteriors and waterproofing and roofing. That's where I spent a lot of my time. Like when I was younger, I was doing a lot of that stuff, kind of the storm chasing type roofing work. But I stayed in the specialty zone and, tile, old historic buildings. That's really where I found my biggest interest in roofing. And then, like I said, 11, 12 years ago or so, we ended up in Dallas, and I shifted over I wanted to get back into general contracting because I had done that, growing up. My family had a construction company, so I had an interest in going into general construction, and that's when I met George and Tasha. They were the owners of JNT at the time, and George's still the owner now. So I met them, and we kind of grew from there. We started off, like I said, doing the residential, and then we've grown it into doing commercial and multifamily over the years.
That's awesome. So did you start in sales and kind of just sort of work your way up?
Yeah. So when I first came in, I was leading a sales team at a roofing company in Fort Worth. And so when I came in, I really just wanted to get involved in as much as I could. And so I started off leading pre-construction even back then. We were a really small team, so I would estimate jobs. I would take them all the way through handoff, do some purchasing work if I needed to. And, that's really where I started the journey of being a system builder, really, for JNT and for construction management. Like that sort of starting doing all the roles on pre-construction all the way seeing it through production. That's what allowed me to kind of, I guess, cement myself.
Yeah, that's awesome. So when you first joined, what was the company? How big was the company? Who did they have on, and what is it today? Like, what's the full team look like?
Yeah. So I mean, we still stay pretty lean today, even, but a lot of that's because we have our subcontractor and vendor networks in all over Texas, but we have them in multiple states. So even though we're able to mobilize, say we have a project in South Dakota right now, we have a couple of projects in Arkansas, we have a few projects here in Texas, Houston and Dallas area. We're able to do that because of our vendor and subcontractor relationships, basically. And then we obviously heavily leverage our software to be able to manage projects from one location. I would say, like, team size wise, I think we have like 20 people on the team now. And back
Okay.
when I started, there was, I think, 4 or 5 of us. It was just owner, like me and George shared an office, and we kind of wrote bids together, right? Like he would write some, I would write some, and we
Yep.
would go on inspections together even back then. So, now, one thing to note about JNT is one part of sort of like call it like a vertically integrated tree, right? We have Elevate, which is Elevate Commercial Investment Group, which is our we can buy the properties or sell them. Then we have JNT, where we can build, do all the construction, do all the value add, do everything we need to do. And then, so this is obviously in the multifamily space. And then we have
Mhm.
Equity Rem, which is our property manager. So we can sort of take care of these projects now from the whole, from very first inception all the way through, the exit on the back end on the real estate side. So that's really, I
Yeah,
think, the advantage that JNT offers. In our growth, we've grown in a way where we can connect more with our investor clients.
yeah. No, that's great. So I'm curious. I mean, I see a lot of people who they start in the residential space, like just like you guys did, but sort of aspire to get into the commercial. What would you say the biggest differences are from selling and managing projects that are residential based versus getting into that multifamily, that commercial?
That's a great question. I think there's a couple of things that are the biggest. I think the first thing is your vendor, and or if you're using subs, if you don't have self-performed labor, those relationships have to be on point, and you need to get appropriate relationships for the kind of projects you're doing. So a lot of guys, I think they try to grow, they'll use the same network of subs or vendors that they were using on the residential side. And then you really quick, hopefully, you're learning that on the multifamily side, it's not going to translate. And the same thing applies from commercial to residential or commercial to multifamily. So sub and vendor network is one of them. And then number two, I think it's you can get away with a really modest software or technology package if you're just doing smaller jobs. Not that technology isn't going to be great for you. I think you still need to utilize it, but I'm saying that you can get away with it if you're doing kitchen remodels, that's all you're doing. But as you start to grow, if you don't have something to manage your schedules, your estimating, your files, I feel like you're setting yourself up for a bad time. So those are really the two big things I think outside of just having the right people on your team.
Yeah. So we'll come back to the technology side. So
Yeah.
when you say though, like the subs who I guess are typically working in the residential space, that doesn't necessarily translate to the commercial. Is that they don't their crews they don't have enough crews. They're not skilled enough, dependable enough. Like what do you see sort of the differences being there? Like what should people be looking for in a sub that's going to do commercial work versus residential?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fair question because everybody deserves the chance to get started, right? So certainly you may have some vendors that you really love that they say they want to get started in a commercial space, but you just haven't seen them do the work. So I think for me, it's obviously you need to be vetting. So making sure that for the type of project they're doing, they have the right kind of insurance or whatever your project says it needs, you need to make sure that they have that, of course, because residential requirements are much different from commercial or even, new construction. So I would say making sure you're vetting. And then as far as the vendors go, I think it's in multifamily specifically, it's a volume issue. I mean, a lot of these guys may have the skill that they need and they may be great carpenters, say, but could they do 30 units at a time? I
Mhm.
think,
Yeah.
and how do you verify that? Well, it takes a little bit of work. Like you need to get portfolios, you need to vet, that's part of vetting, but you need to be able to have that relationship with your vendors where they trust you enough to be honest with you too, because maybe like us, we do lots of different kinds of projects. So we can put those guys where they need to be. If you're really good at the new construction, let's keep you there and we'll keep you fed. And on the multifamily side, let's keep you where you do your best. I think there's a little bit of it's like a nurturing you can do with your vendors in that sense to help put them in the right place to make them successful for you.
Yeah. So do you like when you first bring on a new sub, like do you put them through like some sort of test or exercise? Like do they kind of try them out on a smaller job and then decide if you want to sort of bump them up to the larger jobs?
Yeah, exactly. One of the things I do if it is brand new to us, I have a couple of just older job files where I'll let them know. They're like, "Hey, look, I have a set of plans from this property that we built. I just need you to take a look at it, give me a review, give me a baseline estimate, give me some takeoffs." I like to understand like if where's their knowledge at,
Yeah.
Because I don't mind our team having to help coach vendors and subs up. I mean, that's okay too, because then you can again nurture the relationship. But I think it's good to figure out what somebody's baseline is. It'd be just like if we were
Sure.
hiring a new project manager for our team, you know, you may want to give them some tests, right? Give them the ability to review plans. They might say that they can, but see if they're used to the kind of detail that you're used to.
Yep. Makes sense. So I'm curious. I mean, you mentioned that you're now doing work in multiple states. What did that look like going from just doing work here in Texas to, expanding to other states? And like, what are some of the differences that you've seen, like from state to state, or kind of finding different crews in different states? Like, how has that all worked for you?
Yeah, yeah, and to preface too on the multi-state stuff, we focus on multifamily in out of Texas markets. So for commercial work, we stay in Texas, and
Okay.
mainly that's just because of vendor availability, just knowing the municipalities and just there's a lot more that goes into, I think, doing a tenant build out and being able to mobilize in multiple states. I think that's we're not set up. We're set up to do the multifamily remodeling in multiple states. The main reason there is that a lot of our core vendor network is able to kind of travel with us. So we
Okay.
find out where they're able to go and then we kind of target those markets as well. And then the other thing you have to obviously worry about is licensing. So if
Oh,
we have licenses in a few states. I don't know them off the top of my head, but where some of them reciprocate, so then you're able to have access to multiple states. But that's something you have to check out right away. Like I say, you're operating in Texas, then you want to operate in, say, New Mexico. You better make sure you have what you need to be able to do that. So, but reciprocation is great because if you do have a license somewhere and you can maintain it, then you can work in other states because of that too.
yeah, absolutely. So that's interesting, though. It sounds like so some of your crews, you'll actually they'll travel to the state where the job is, and it's probably similar type job, just in a different state. Is the multifamily, is that like under the same owner?
Under the same owner as far as the clients go.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes. So remember, because we have our own, we work with Elevate. So like we do a lot of Elevate's projects. So like if Elevate
Yeah.
gets one, then we'll go out of the area to do those. But yeah, sometimes it is the same client that'll be say from here and then they'll do a job in a different area. As far as the vendors themselves though, like, one good example would be, we have a tried and true steel fabricator here that does like carports or steel structures, right? So I'll come to him and ask first, look, we're doing 2 projects in Northwest Arkansas. What does that look like for you? Right? Timeline, are you able to mobilize? What do you guys need? There's cases where maybe it's one of our own properties and we can get our vendors a unit to stay in while they're there working, right? There's lots of creative ways, especially when you have the advantage of where we acquire the properties too. You can find ways to get your vendors there. The ones that you trust, the ones that you already have vetted. It doesn't always work, but if you can, I definitely suggest trying to find a way.
Yeah. That's awesome. I mean, again, I think that's when I was in the commercial GC, we did a lot of work for like Public Storage and some other national brands that, we built the relationship really strong here with the local, guy, and then sort of walked up to meet the regional guys. And then ultimately, we were able to expand into other markets like, California, Oklahoma, Arkansas, like where, they just kind of had that relationship with our guy who sort of brought us in, but then we had to go out and build our own, crew and find the subs. And so like a lot of times it sort of felt like starting over, even though we had the contract and we had the work. But again, you're kind of starting fresh with the guys who, you got your tried and true crew here. So it's nice that it sounds like you can actually get those guys to mobilize. So I know sometimes that's possible, sometimes it's not.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, the same way with like I think leveraging your clients in your client relationships as well. It's similar with your sub and vendor networks. And what I mean by that is, we're doing a commercial remodel right now, and the client actually had an HVAC vendor that they loved and that they're going to work with on this deal. So I got that information on the front end. Well, I'm going to touch base with them because I want to get to know them. We're going to be working together on this project. I don't know them. I had a great conversation. I learned a lot about their company, and I immediately sent him 3 more ITBs 30 minutes later. "Hey, man,
Nice.
you look great. You look qualified. Here's 3 other projects we're doing right now that aren't linked to that other client. They're our own projects. Take a look at these for us." Because, again, he was referred to us in the sense that the client really liked him, but then in other scenarios, I may meet a vendor, a great vendor in a new area. I'll ask them, who do you know? Who do you know in this area that you trust? Who do you see on all these projects that you do? That's to me the greatest way to network with other vendors is to just talk to the ones you already know because those
Yeah.
guys see each other on these projects and they know who's doing a good job. They know maybe who hasn't done such a good job. Um, I think that's a really great thing that can easily just be overlooked.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. I mean, I hear all the time people struggle, to really build that bench, of subs and like, really having, you keep referring to it as that network, and you're absolutely right. It's all about tapping into that network. And, to some extent, I sort of feel like that might be a little bit harder on the residential side because you kind of got a bunch of sort of solo, people out there and, every project is kind of its own little thing versus on the commercial side, just like how that guy introduced you to someone, that they really like, I mean, you immediately jumped on that. You saw that as an opportunity to, hey, if this guy's great, coming highly recommended, well, I got some work for him too. And, bringing him into your fold, it's a great way to build that. And, I preach all the time. It's like, you got to treat these, these subs as, just like leads, like, you got to nurture them. You got to stay in touch. You got to make sure that the good ones, you can keep getting them involved and hopefully they'll become go-tos for you.
Yeah, and I think you're right on the point because or right on the nose. The relationships you have with your vendors will make or break you as your company. It's just as important as your clients. I mean, yeah, obviously you need clients because you need to be able to write contracts in order to do work. But if you don't have good relationships with your vendors, and this goes for suppliers as well as subs, if you don't have those relationships, they're not nurtured, you're not keeping up with your communication, you're just going to be in a bad situation because you're not going to be able to build the jobs that you've got signed up.
Yeah.
Um, I think it happens to a lot of contractors. They focus 80% of their energy on their clients, which they need a lot of your energy, but then they give 10-20% to their subs and vendor relationships. And you're always going to be in a cycle where you're trying to find new people. And that's no
Well,
position to put yourself in.
Yep. 100%. You also mentioned the importance of, having the right software and technology in place and how, as a residential builder, maybe that, you don't have to be as organized or as buttoned up, you're taking on smaller jobs, probably, lower volume at times, but then as you kind of expanded into the multifamily, into the commercial, it really became even more important to have, the full set of tools that you need to manage the job. I mean, can you tell us a little bit about sort of what did that transition look like for you guys? And, what do you think is the most important that people need to make sure that they're focused on?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, just as important as communication and networking and all those things is how you're able to deliver your data, your information, your estimates to your client, and then how well are you able to keep yourself organized during construction. So for us, we started off like, I don't know, 99.9% of everybody, which is with Excel. Uh, we had these wildly intricate Excel sheets that George and I spent years fine tuning and tweaking and you forget one spot and you could throw your thing off. And
Yep.
they're great. I still use spreadsheets from time to time. You need to throw something together. There's nothing wrong with it. Again, people have successful businesses with Excel, but I think the advantage of leveraging software is that it's going to keep your team more organized. It's going to let you communicate more effectively, not just with your client, but with your vendors and your subs. And then on the back end, it's also going to help you keep your money organized. So if you have something that can integrate with your accounting software, either way, it's just there's the whole cycle. The software technology can connect you from the very beginning until the very end, and then it also gives you the ability to keep up with your network. I mean, so once the job is done, what do you do then? Where's that client's information? How do you manage your follow-ups? I think to me, the power comes when as many of those things that I just mentioned are in one solution. That's when you have something that's powerful.
Yeah. Do you think that, like for the residential guys, I mean, like, oftentimes we see people coming and they want to sort of start with the estimating and, trying to, kind of manage the, one job and the budget, but they kind of the project management side can be an afterthought. The, scheduling, the, having POs and work orders and making sure that every bill is tied back, and like, managing the finances. I mean, that often is kind of the secondary, thing for these builders. I mean, do you think that's just a function of, they're still kind of really trying to get that, get the volume and sort of get into, hey, I'm not just a solo owner operator anymore. I need to build out a team, and I need to manage this, a bunch more people, or do you think it's just they just don't know yet what they don't know?
Yeah, yeah, it's true. I think it could be a mix of things. A lot of people start off, like you said, just one person or two people on the team, and then you don't really know how to fold additional, team players into your mix. But you also have the issue of multiple people coming together to form a company, and then people have done things differently. They're set in their ways. You have a project manager who's like, I write my stuff in a notebook every morning when I have my coffee. I write it down, right? I keep my list. I stay organized, and maybe they do. I think that the idea though with the software, where even you could leverage it as a smaller company, would be, I would say, think about it like having an administrative assistant that can do all kinds of tasks for you, that's in the background, that's always there, that's always ready. You think of something at 10 o'clock at night, you can pop that open, save a note for yourself. To me, it's just, again, it's eliminating all those little things, taking notes here, keeping a photo there. You know, that's the part that will bog you down as you grow. As you get more complex projects, you need a place to store your documents. You need a place to store your vendor lists, your client lists. Like I said, when you start knocking off multiple things and you have one solution, then it's going to allow you to improve. It's going to allow you to do bigger and better projects.
Sure. How do you go about, like, when you want to implement this software, or any technology within your business? Like, how do you go about that? And what does that look like, from, getting it set up to, getting buy-in from the team and training, everyone from your own team to your subs and suppliers? Like, how do you approach that?
True. Yeah, no, it's a great question. So obviously, we use JobTread because we're talking to you here. But before we go to that, so originally what I used to do is we wanted to implement a new software, a new system. There really wasn't a lot of options to direct people to, with previous things we've used, especially if it was Excel. So I would just build like a training. We would have like a training handbook basically. And I would build that, and we would host a meeting and have everybody come in. We would do a training in house. It takes the whole team's bandwidth for multiple days. Everybody's got to be there. Everybody's got to go through the training. And it would work. It was the only option at the time. I think when you contrast that with what's available, now in 2025, when you look at JobTread, for example, one of the first things I did when I got into software was the help desk tab, and then all the trainings that I could do, and got myself certified in all the things that I'm going to be asking the team to use, so that I knew what it was like to go through it. And then I can say, these are the ones you guys need to check out. And you guys have gone a step further where you have everything organized into, by that person's role. So like, say, a project manager or accounting or estimating or sales. And that's really important because the software is so complex that you have people on your team, they can do it, or rather, it's not so complex that one person couldn't learn the whole thing. But if you want to have people do like just one task, if you have somebody that's just doing accounting, you can have them do it. But
Yeah.
you can also have your project manager take the accounting course, so they understand what your accountant has to go through. They understand why it's important to load the change orders the right way, or attach your work orders to the line items the correct way.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the training starts to bridge your team together to make you guys more powerful as a group, is everybody understands what the other person's having to do when they're going through the workflow. You kind of have each other's backs.
Yeah. I mean, it's, it can often be, I know firsthand, because when we first, were building this out, when I was running the construction company, like, I had a couple of guys, one in particular, who just, like, very resistant to change. Said, "Look, I've been doing it this way for the last 10 years. Like, it works for me." It's like, okay, well, that's great, but it's not working for everyone else. Like, we don't, you're trying to just call the subs and say, you got these guys, but like, none of us, the rest of the team's new. And so it's like we weren't able to really, kind of work well with him. And so like it took me having to sit down with him, and just have some of that one-on-one time, like, hey man, like show me your process. If I can show you a better way to do it, would you be willing to adopt it? He's like, yeah, but you're not going to find a better way. I was like, all right, well, we'll see about that. We'll set that aside for a second. But like, at least for me, I found that like, really digging in to the people who you do get that resistance to change from, because I mean, that will happen. That is inevitable. And ultimately, like, you got to figure out like, how do I, articulate and demonstrate like how this will directly impact their day to day? How is this going to help them be more efficient, more effective? How is this going to help them be a better team member to everyone else? Like, at the end of the day, like, you got to sort of figure out, how do you get them motivated to want to adopt, whatever that solution may be. And ultimately, I mean, I turned that guy from our biggest naysayer into our biggest evangelist, who would ultimately go around and yell at everyone else if they didn't have their, put the schedules in, and they didn't have, the data in the system. And so it's like, I think, that's just kind of one example here. I mean, I'm curious, have you had to deal with, people who just gave you the pushback, and they weren't, immediately ready to adopt, like, and how did you sort of overcome that?
Yeah, on both sides, not just employees, but also with subs and vendors. I think we've had vendors where they have a really hard time being able to adopt, you know, maybe a software procedure. Like if we're going to release our ITBs in um, a software, how do they go about submitting their estimate to us? I think there are different strategies. Well, I guess it's sort of the same now that I think about it, because whether it's your employee or it's a vendor contact, really what you're trying to do is free up their time.
Yeah.
Because if from a vendor, if I can teach them how to get everything uploaded, and they know when they send a message, they're communicating with all the point of contacts they need to at once. They don't have to worry about sending a text and an email and a phone. Same thing for your internal team. When I've had issues with like employees where they push back on the technology, I go by the approach of, let me show you how it works and let me show you the benefit in real life. Here it is right here. Because if you have a system that's working for you, it shouldn't be hard to find that solution in real time and show that employee or show that vendor. Like, here's the advantage of a takeoff, right? You have it, it's right here. I have everything verified. When, say, your plumber comes and asks you, how many running foot of that gas line did I need? I have the answer.
Yeah.
If I don't have a takeoff solution, or I don't have a place to view my plans, that's a really easy one to illustrate. And I think those people that are against the change or against the technology, I've found the easiest way to get them to buy into something is showing the benefit to the time that they're saving in their day, like removing busy work, removing things that tie them up unnecessarily, that don't let them tackle their main primary action items.
Yeah.
Um, Normally you can kind of see the light bulb turn on. Like, oh wait, you mean I don't have to do those other three things? And it's like, no, if you do it this way, you're gonna not just save yourself time, but you're skipping steps later.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that applies to whether it's an employee or if it's to a vendor.
Have you ever had to like either remove someone or threaten to remove them or not pay them over, them not being willing to use, adopt the processes and technology?
I think we've had a few vendors that maybe going through the vetting process, like they can't provide what we need them to provide. I would
Uh,
say, you have to make that hard decision. Are you willing to take a risk? Is your company willing to take a risk on hiring that vendor? I would say I can't remember a time where we ever had to let anybody go. I think that generally those things work themselves out. You might have people that are harder to adapt to a
yeah.
process or procedure, but I think if you have like a whole bunch of your employees kind of fight back at you all at once, you may want to turn the mirror a little bit, make sure that
Yeah.
what you're asking for, have and I would say as a leader, are you willing to do the process that you're asking them to do? And have you learned it? Like, did you put the time in to learn whatever it is you're asking your team to do? I can say confidently that when I'm teaching these guys what to do, I've done it. And I think that that's important, especially with software processes and with implementing some new system. Like, management, leadership, ownership, whatever, needs to have that understanding before. And I realize you got to trial some things out too, but for the most part, I mean, understand what your goals are and how you're going to implement it, and then it'll increase your buy-in.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think, again, you got to be a great role model yourself. And if people see you not using it, not understanding it, then how are you going to get their trust and their buy-in? It sounds like you're probably one of the champions, for the systems and processes at JNT, and I think that's great. Have basically you've documented and created kind of your SOPs, and like, is that just part of the new employee or new sub onboarding process? Like they're it's all documented there. Is that what you've done? Like created like a manual or something to help them?
Yeah, we still use, we keep that stuff pretty simple. Just use, Cloud Drive docs so we can, edit the SOPs whenever we need, open them up and edit them. We were just editing our incoming sales process, this past week. And I think that's another important note. You gotta check that stuff from time to time. Like, especially as you add new features or new people to the team, be willing to make a change if you need to. Like, if something just isn't working and you're grinding gears, change it. We found a really cool integration the other day for JobTread that we're going to try to implement next week with I think it's like Zapier or something. And it'll let us get our instead of entering our new clients or leads into two places, it's going to allow us to enter into JobTread, which is what the SOP says to do. And now it'll automatically send that client to the other software we use for like our constant contact and drip campaigns. So again, you got to be willing to go in there and change something and improve the process when you need to.
Yeah, I love that. Again, so many times, people kind of get stuck in their ways and they don't want to continually, adapt. And it's like that, just in today's day and age, like, you got to continually look at how can we improve, put your ego aside and say, hey, we're not perfect and we never will be. We might strive for perfection, but let's just always look at it. And I think it's important too that, like, especially, the leadership of companies can, again, be open and let their team come to them with frustrations or challenges or ideas and say, all right, like, I hear you. Now let's figure out, what is a good solution? How can we make this better? How can we, eliminate, duplicate entry or, whatever process they may be working on. A lot of times, when you focus on it, when you understand that that's a bottleneck for someone or some process, then that will help you come up with a better way to do it. And, you got to be open. You got to solicit that feedback from your team and be willing to hear it.
Yeah. Yeah. Hearing the feedback, I think, is key because, you may know the process that you want from top to bottom, but also you're not necessarily the person that is doing it every day. So just listen to that feedback. And, if you've got a team of really any size, a few people up to, 50, you got to be meeting regularly with your team, even if you keep it brief, but just meeting so that everybody's on the same page about basic SOP stuff, and then have a way to update those documents. Um, we even started, we have like a client in JobTread that's our own company, and then we use the dashboard to put our meeting notes in now. So we're trying to
Nice.
just live in JobTread, and that's, again, remember what I said at the beginning. The more things you can do in one solution, that's when you start to really have power. And I think it just gives people don't have to think about where to go. They know where to go to get their information, to communicate, whatever. So just find creative ways to utilize these tools and leverage them to help you be successful.
Yeah, that's awesome. Can you walk us through kind of, so, from pre-construction, sales, kind of what does that process look like? And I'm curious, like, how do you involve, JobTread within the sales process? Like, is that able to be, a selling point or, an added benefit to the client to help them decide to move forward with you guys?
Yeah, so we start talking about our software system immediately. So from the time we get an incoming lead, and most of our client leads are they're referral based because we do so much networking. We don't spend a ton on advertising. It's referrals. So
That's great.
we get a lead that comes in, and our admin at the office will respond, and we're basically telling them about the company with our initial response. We even have little screenshots in there to show what JobTread looks like. Here's what your dashboard would look like. Here's, this is what we do, and then we have our portfolio. So from the initial incoming lead, we're letting them know right away, like you're getting that white glove treatment. And then from there, it basically just we get their information into JobTread. We create a customer, and then from there, our business development team can start the initial conversations. Now, you could do this with your estimating team without having biz dev, but if you have the resources for a business development rep, then it's a good way to get them making constant contact with your clients right from the get go. And then
Hmm.
as your estimator is also getting to know them and working through the process of the bid, you have somebody else who's just always there for them, because your estimating and sales team can get really backed up. So we sort of leverage both. So but yeah, once it's in JobTread, from there, anything we do at site visits, any of the plans documents, any of the specifications, photos, videos, all that information goes in there. Now, once we kind of keep it as a customer until we decide for sure we're gonna go after it, like we're gonna try to do an estimate. We do personally spend a little bit of time qualifying the clients to see if are they a fit for us, right? The same as if we're a fit for them. Hopefully, as a contractor, you're able to see if the client is a fit for you. Once we've decided as a team that we're going to pursue, which is generally a conversation between myself and Luke, who's our director of construction, then we'll move it forward and we'll create a job at that point. And then the job is where the estimate will live, the budget, and we'll just copy all the files from the customer over to the job so that everything kind of lives in there. And then our
Sure.
biz dev team will keep on the customer profile to track communications and ongoing things. All they kind of just live in the customer tab, and then our estimating and production team lives in the job tab. So, and now more recently, the plans tab for the takeoff. So just thank you so much. We live there now too. So um
Nice.
that's great. So that all the files were already there, and you could already view plans before, but
Sure.
even if you're not doing takeoffs, this is a fantastic way to just see your spec really quick.
Yeah.
But yeah, so and then the clients basically those jobs live in there through the full cycle. I mean, we have the client sign the estimate, we release our contract, all that's through JobTread, and then we track the billing and stuff on the back end. Basically the whole life cycle we exist within JobTread.
Yeah, that's awesome. So were you guys using something else for your takeoffs before?
Yes, yes. So I spent a lot of years using PlanSwift, and then more recently I was using Stack CT, which is web based. Um, some advantages, but again, having it in one place to me, like I said, the more things you have in one place, man, your team doesn't have to leave, and yourself, you don't have to leave it. So,
Yeah.
and I like what you guys did with the takeoff overall. I think the way you built it is great. Um, and for anybody that thinks there's anything missing with JobTread, just take a look at the what is it, the suggestions tab where you guys have like hundreds of
Feature request.
things that you're actively engaging with your clients who are asking for added things. I mean, it's incredible. I mean, I've never experienced that with a software company before, where you have a direct link with the development team on the apps and features and integrations they're working on. It just, I promise you, whoever's watching this, if you're thinking something that JobTread doesn't do, I promise it's in that list.
Yeah.
It may not be the top item, but it's in that list already. I promise you.
Yeah. I mean, it's, at the end of the day, it's like, why wouldn't we want to collaborate with our customers and take that feedback and let them help us prioritize it? Because, at the end of the day, like we want to make sure that we're delivering the features and the functions that, that our customers and that the market as a whole they need. And, there's a lot of times where, you can have people kind of ask for, one-off things that, look, at the end of the day, like nobody voted on it. It wasn't, it didn't seem like it was like something that was going to benefit everyone. It's like, you gotta, sometimes it can be hard though. You got this really big customer who wants this very specific thing that's only going to benefit them.
Right.
Like I've learned at my last software company, like you can't let one company hijack your development. You
Right.
got to do what's right, for the greater good of everyone. And that's why we won't, we won't let people pay for development or pay for, custom features or whatever. It's like, look, if you think that's a great idea, then make sure it'll benefit everyone and go, we got our Facebook group and people can go and rile other people up and drive the votes. And, when it gets enough traction and it's, a fully flushed out idea that makes sense, then, we love to deliver on that. I mean, that's how we can all win and we can work together as a community. And so I think it's, it's definitely something very neat that we have been able to sort of, form with this, relationship through the community to work together. And, obviously some people, they feel really passionate about one particular thing and it's not getting up there. And, but it's all a function of time, right? And it's about doing
Yeah.
what's gonna benefit everyone. And so I think we've sort of found that good balance between, leveraging, the insight and the feedback versus also, I mean, we do have our sort of vision, and sometimes there's a, just like in construction, right? Like sometimes you gotta lay the foundation for something, and then a
True.
couple steps down the path, you can actually get to that feature. We sort of have to kind of take it all into account, but I think we've done a good job of sort of balancing the customer feedback, and then kind of from
Yeah.
a technical standpoint, what we need to implement and do.
Well, I think you've done a great job, and not to get too granular, but I think that so there are two things that stand out to me the most. So the first thing with JobTread is the ability to, well, I have a rep that I talk to, and I have not yet encountered, I've only had experience with it for, I don't know, 7 months or something. But whenever I've encountered something that I'm unsure of, I've been able to work with my rep to find a way for us to figure it out. So even if it was like a workaround, maybe the feature that I need isn't exactly there, we've never yet been able to find something where we just hit a stone wall, right? There's always a way to tweak something to make it work for us, whether it be, templating or, cloning jobs or whatever it may be for us, because we do a lot of repetition. So we try to reuse the resources. The second thing though is your foundational, like, I guess it's like the software framework. So what I love about it is from estimating, all of my revisions can live in my budget. And then my budget can live for the duration of the project. And what I mean by that is, if you're not familiar with JobTread, basically when you enter your data in there for your estimates, you can just group and group and group and group and group. So you can have all of your revisions of your estimate living in one budget. And I've used a lot of softwares over the years. Normally, you're going to have multiple things. You have to pop in and out of them in order to see, like, hey, well, what did I have in version 1? What did I have in version 2? What did I have in version 3? You got 16 windows open. I can go to one budget tab and I can have 6 groups in there if I want. I could have 20. There's probably some limit. But I can see all of them. I was literally doing it this morning. I had a project where we were on V3. I needed to see what we had done on V1. I can just expand and collapse V1 in the same budget and just check what I had. I mean, that foundation though, because it lets you price, then you can see your markup, you can move to your accounting, you can see what you've billed, and it all lives in the same budget. I think that is the best implementation of like a budget that bridges a whole project that I've ever seen. Because every software that I've used gives you the ability to see a budget, but none of them until this that I've seen allow you to track everything in
Yeah.
one place. And I think that gives you guys the ability to just add to it forever. You could
Yeah.
just keep adding stuff, like add your takeoffs. Now you got plans. Now you got, to me, that's the biggest resource here, is that your whole team can live in there.
Yeah.
That's huge. And then again, like I said, number one was the support from your rep. I think that's cool.
Yeah.
Hopefully you guys can always give that to your clients, even as you grow. I think that's great.
Yeah, that's absolutely the goal. And I mean, we make it even harder on ourselves to hire because we require anyone who's coming into a customer facing role, like we want them to have experience in construction. I find that it's very hard, to try to teach them what it's like to be a project manager, to be an estimator, to be a construction business owner, to, that like that is just experience that if they have that, they can like have that empathy and they can relate so much better and know what the person on the other end of the phone, what the client, what the user is feeling and what they're going through and what they're trying to solve,
Yeah.
versus just bringing any random person in off the street. I mean, we can teach anyone JobTread, but I can't give them that innate experience being part of a construction company, in some form or fashion. I mean, it's not like, we're going to say you have to have worked at a GC or at a home builder. Like, well, we can make it fairly broad, but like I think that really helps us to resonate and connect with our clients, and
I
then,
didn't know
you
you
know,
did that, but that now that I know that, that is it makes a lot of sense. I
yeah.
mean, it makes sense why you have these little things that I think just work or click because the people writing it or working on your team have experience in construction. So it definitely shows.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Our the developer who wrote the whole takeoff, I mean, he came from one of the top largest GCs in the country, and he like literally spent, years doing takeoff and using all these other solutions. And so like it was just a natural no-brainer for us to take on that endeavor when we were able to recruit him to come join us. But I do think that we very intentionally started with focusing on the financials, the budget. I've never seen any other software that can do what our budget can do. But I think too, it's about making sure that when you design, the software, that it's flexible enough to meet the various needs. I mean, at the end of the day, managing construction projects, managing construction business, like the fundamentals of it aren't like really that different, but you have to be able to have that flexibility to manage the unique situations, like especially in your situation, commercial. I mean, you got a lot of revisions, a lot of different moving components, versus, hey, I'm going to come in and just tear out, a kitchen and put in a new one. That might not be as long lived of a project, and there might not be as much, kind of versions, if you will.
True.
But I think that's how we very intentionally design this is to make it, very flexible to meet the needs of a lot of different types of construction businesses.
Yeah. I think it does. I mean, I don't think there's any reason that you could be a kitchen remodeling company, you could just be a single trade. You could be an electrical firm, a tile layer, flooring company, whatever. I think the benefit here would still be good. I mean, I still would I would be willing to bet that you would see an improvement in your business regardless. Now,
Yeah.
whether or not your business is set up to make the jump, that's a different thing. But I
Yeah.
think that you would see an improvement in your workflow for sure.
So a lot of times, we're starting to get a whole bunch of commercial contractors looking at us. I mean, they're spending a fortune with Procore and some of the other, kind of larger solutions out there. I mean, like, I think kind of one of the most common questions we get asked is like, how do you handle like RFIs? And so like kind of what does that process look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, for me, again, because we're sort of training the clients up from the beginning. So once we get to the point where we're estimating, I've introduced them to the software. So I'm able to communicate normally inside of JobTread. We have a couple of clients who just they're traveling all the time. They're just all over. So it's a little bit harder to get them to, explaining how you can use it on your phone and stuff. But the fact that I can still message within JobTread and get information back, um, sometimes if it's an RFI on a document, I'll simply start a conversation with them in the document itself. I can mark it up and then release it to them in there as like a message. If it's somebody who's a little less savvy with the software, then I just sort of send it normally from the document. Like, so in the conversation, that's another great thing. You have conversations directly in a document. So if I've released my proposal to the client, I'll generally have the conversation there if it's something after proposal. But if it's an RFI during, say, they gave me their plans, we had one this past week that was pretty complicated, you could say, for an RFI, and I was able to just mark up the document in JobTread and then comment to him, and then he was able to review it and respond back to me. So, I mean, the process is pretty fast and easy. Now, you guys may even have some ways to utilize that I just haven't even learned yet, but I just keep a folder basically in the files that has a record of the conversations, and then if I'm not sending messages in JobTread, but normally I just have the conversation right on the specification or the plans or whatever the document is. That's where I'm asking the questions.
Yep, it's pretty much what I've heard from all of our other commercial builders too. They're
It's
like,
so
"Look,
easy.
you can do it all right there in the document. Like you can have as much detail as
Yeah.
you need." And they're just like, honestly, like we get way fewer, requests for more information because we've already been able to deliver the level of detail that they need. We've given them access to the plans, the files, the
Yeah.
whatever it may be. And so like I think that's like the really neat thing. I mean, I've seen Procore, they got a very elaborate, kind of processes for RFIs, submittals, things like that. But again, I think at the end of the day, like we want to keep JobTread, as simple as we can to make it easy to use so that you can involve people, but we've still given you the power to share however much detail and the information that you need. So I think it
Yeah.
is about just kind of figuring out that right process and where, to manage that communication and back and forth.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think again, I think the only yeah, I mean, I think the only struggles I have is just hitting your ceiling for quantities. Like I blew past the 100-page plan thing like literally in 10 seconds. But that was fine because it doesn't really matter. Like you can just load the stuff that you need to load for your takeoffs and then you can just back pages out. So again, you guys because of the way you guys communicate and your dedication to talking to your clients about your ideas for the future, those kind of things just simply they do not bother me. Like if I encounter something where I'm like, "Oh, it's only 100 pages for the plans only." Like most people would never hit 100 pages, right?
Yeah.
But I know that that's not going to be that way forever. And
Yeah.
I know that I can just submit a feature request or I can reach out to my rep and find out what the plans are for the future, and it's gonna be figured. There'll be a solution, right? Or like when I clone my RFPs too many times, too quickly or whatever. But that again, that's a like you said at the beginning, that's a individual construction company issue, right? That's a JNT thing. You guys are casting a net to service, you know, 1,000 different kinds of contractors, right? So I think just in the past, though, you work with software companies that where you say work with, there really was no work with. It was just you bought the software and then you just got to figure out how to use it because there isn't any support.
Yeah.
Or there's an illusion of support. There'll be somebody to talk to you on the phone, but they're not offering any solutions, right? It's just
Yeah.
like you bought the software, that's what you got. So I think with you guys, I just feel collaborative and it's exciting to like see new features and all the discussions come out and everything like that.
So one of the probably the other big thing that we hear and we want to, hopefully come up with a better solution for, is the notion of like tracking retainage and then AIA billing, the
Yeah,
G702, G703, we've talked to AIA, the AIA org, and there's, some potential there, but it's like super expensive for us to like try to integrate that export directly in. I've heard a lot of builders just kind of have their own version of it and they just sort of
true.
plug in the numbers and then save their own PDF export in the same format, but not necessarily, the official letterhead
Yeah.
AIA document. But like, how do you guys manage that? I mean, like, obviously retainage is very, very important, for
Yes.
commercial large projects. So what do you do
Yeah,
to account for that?
I don't directly manage on the back end, but from what I'm understanding is if we're encountering the G702 or 703, we're just going to manage the document, you know, freestanding outside. But all the data that you need to be loading into it, like everything you're being billed for, and all that is already in BuilderTrend. I mean BuilderTrend, it's in JobTread. I still say that because they're the ones we don't speak of anymore because I moved on happily. But I'm saying is that I used to like having to put the information into the G702 or 703. If you guys could integrate that to where the document could live inside of JobTread, that would obviously be a huge improvement, I think, if you could do that because it is time consuming to fill it out. And you also have to have like if your vendors aren't super up to speed, because you'll run into that too, where like your vendor network, your subs that you're using, they don't even know how to fill out like the 703 on their own side, right? So you're doing the whole thing. If you run into that situation, it's going to make things easier if you have it in your software too. Um, but the way you guys do the budgeting now, I think all the data you need is right there. So you're
Yeah.
really just filling it out into the other format until you guys can integrate it. Um, have you also had talks about maybe bringing the contracts themselves into JobTread where you could release those out to people or no?
A little bit. Yeah. I mean, it's,
That would be
again,
interesting.
sort of there's kind of this, we got to sort of figure out what does this relationship look like with these,
True.
these other companies, because I know, obviously you would have to kind of bring your own account. We're not going to like increase the price of this for everyone when, most people aren't going to need this, or they're happily, just going to sort of do it on their own and circumvent, spending a lot of money on these branded, contracts and forms, if you will. But Yeah, I think that's, again, it's just kind of the other most common thing that we hear from commercial builders. And at the end of the day, they're like, if that's kind of the one little reporting nuance, I mean, we get you the data, you just got to sort of plug it into your own version of that contract. I mean, again, one day I do want to see us get to that point, but other than that, I mean, I don't see any reason that, like, large commercial builders, and we have a lot of them, just like you
True.
guys, can adopt this and have a much better experience with software that's, just a little bit more modern, little easier to use. Hopefully, helps them kind of win more jobs, and they don't have to feel like they're having to, fit a round peg in a square hole.
Yeah, and it does depend on you as your builder. So what I was talking about a second ago is there may be a scenario where you're filling out the 703 for your client because you're the builder, that's all they're requiring. But you also may be a GC where you're working with like a lender and they're requiring 703s from every one of your vendors. So there can be layers to it. I think as long as you guys, I mean, you have all these little things you can turn off and on. You have taxes, you have your ONP you can change. Maybe you integrate the retainage system that way, and then you just maybe you end up having an integration for the contracts, like where somebody can
Yeah.
simply, they can provide a link to the AIA from their own account or something when they release the estimate to the proposal document to their client. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, I think you're right. Everything you need is in your budget tab already. You just have to enter it into the 703. So I think you're already giving people a huge advantage.
Awesome. Well, look, hey, I'm curious, kind of just as we wrap up here, like,
Yeah.
do you have any advice that you would give to others? Just regardless what type of builder they are, what their role is, like, is there anything that, like, you wish you would have known, earlier on, years ago when you started, when you first kind of worked on implementing processes, systems, hiring, like, different jobs, like, any sort of just general advice that might be helpful to others who are, along their journey, striving to reach the point that J&T has gotten to?
That's a great question. I'll keep it brief for you. I think that I would go back in time, and if I was going to tell myself, I would say, don't be afraid of trying softwares or systems that you feel like you're not ready for, or you feel like you could never figure out, or you feel like your team could never figure out. All that is just it's it's not real. Like you can figure it out and it will improve your business. If you're somebody who's still paper notes, Excel, you can improve your business. And it's worth it to try. Even if you feel like you can't get it, you feel like you're not tech savvy enough, there are solutions. And with JobTread, you have support. You have somebody that's going to help you. I think I would go back in time and tell myself or tell anybody getting started now is get integrated with software and those systems as quickly as you can. And in 2025, that matters more than ever. You have to get yourself up to speed because I promise you that your competitors are. So you need to.
Yeah. It's awesome. Appreciate that advice. I think it's very sound advice. Hopefully, everyone's been able to take away a handful of nuggets from this. I really
Hopefully.
appreciate you coming on, sharing your experience, a little bit more about how you guys have been able to go from, residential builder into, the commercial, the multifamily, multi-state, very impressive, what you all have been able to build over there, David. So thank you for coming on and for sharing this, and, all the continued feedback, how we can make JobTread even better tool for you and your team. We look forward to continuing to collaborate and work with you on that.
Yes, sir. Thanks, Eric. I appreciate it.
All right, have a good one. See ya. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Builder Stories. We hope you enjoyed the conversation and gained valuable insights that can help you in your journey along the way. Don't forget to subscribe to the show and leave us a review. And as always, if you or someone you know has a story to share, please contact us at builderstories.com. We'd love to hear from you. I'm Eric Fortenberry, and remember, every builder has a unique story. Keep building yours.